Picture a country that spanned 11 time zones, a superpower that challenged the United States for global dominance, a political experiment that aimed to build a communist paradise, but ended in collapse. This is the story of the Soviet Union, a tale of revolution, power, sacrifice, and ultimately, dissolution. From its birth in the ashes of the Russian Empire to its final days in 1991, the USSR shaped the 20th century like no other. So, how did this colossal state come to be? What defined its 70-year existence, and why did it fall? Let's dive into the complete history of the Soviet Union. The story begins not in 1922, but in 1917 with the Russian Revolution. The old Tsarist regime was overthrown, and after a brutal civil war, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, emerged victorious. On December 30, 1922, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, was officially formed, uniting Russia, Ukraine, Belarusia, and the Transcaucasian Federation. Lenin envisioned a state run by workers and peasants, a beacon for worldwide communist revolution. He introduced the new economic policy, a temporary mix of state control and private enterprise, to rebuild the war-torn economy. However, Lenin's health was failing. He suffered a series of strokes and died in January 1924, leaving a massive power vacuum and an unanswered question: who would lead the Soviet Union next? The answer was Joseph Stalin. Through shrewd political maneuvering, he outplayed his rivals, most notably Leon Trotsky, and by the late 1920s, he had consolidated absolute power. Stalin's rule marked a dramatic and brutal shift. He abandoned Lenin's mixed economy for a rigid system of central planning, launching the first of his ambitious 5-year plans in 1928. The goal was rapid industrialization at any cost. Entire cities were built from scratch, and the Soviet Union transformed from an agrarian society into an industrial giant. But this progress came at a horrifying human price. To fund industrialization, Stalin initiated the forced collectivization of agriculture. Peasants were forced to give up their land and join state-run farms. Resistance was met with overwhelming force, leading to widespread famine, especially in Ukraine, known as the Holodomor, where millions starved to death. This was a man-made catastrophe, a direct consequence of Stalin's ruthless policies. Stalin's reign of terror didn't stop there. In the mid-1930s, he unleashed the Great Purge, a paranoid campaign to eliminate any and all perceived enemies of the state. High-ranking party officials, military leaders, intellectuals, and ordinary citizens were arrested, subjected to show trials, and either executed or sent to the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps. Millions perished. By the end of the 1930s, Stalin had created a totalitarian state built on fear and absolute control, with a pervasive cult of personality that portrayed him as an infallible, godlike leader. Then, the world was plunged into its Second Great War. Despite signing a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany in 1939, Stalin was caught completely by surprise when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, in June 1941. The initial months were disastrous for the Red Army, which had been weakened by Stalin's purges. German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, reaching the outskirts of Moscow. But the Soviet people, despite their suffering under Stalin, rallied to defend their motherland in what they called the Great Patriotic War. The brutal Russian winter, combined with fierce Soviet resistance, halted the German advance at Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad became the war's turning point on the Eastern Front. From there, the Red Army began its long, bloody push to Berlin. By the time the war ended in 1945, the Soviet Union had suffered unimaginable losses, an estimated 27 million people, more than any other nation. But it had emerged as a victorious military superpower, with its flag flying over the Reichstag in Berlin. The end of World War II did not bring peace, but a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. The world was now divided into two blocks: the capitalist West, led by the United States, and the communist East, led by the Soviet Union. An Iron Curtain, as Winston Churchill famously called it, descended across Europe. This era was defined by an intense ideological, political, and military rivalry. It saw the Berlin blockade, the Korean War, and a terrifying nuclear arms race. In 1949, the Soviets successfully tested their first atomic bomb, ending the American monopoly and ushering in an age of mutually assured destruction. The world held its breath, living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. Stalin died in 1953, and after another power struggle, Nikita Khrushchev emerged as the new leader. Khrushchev shocked the world in 1956 with his secret speech, in which he denounced Stalin's crimes and personality cult, initiating a period of de-Stalinization. Some political prisoners were released, and a cultural thaw allowed for slightly more freedom of expression. The Khrushchev era was one of contradictions. On one hand, it saw incredible scientific achievements. In 1957, the USSR launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, and in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space, stunning the West and igniting the space race. On the other hand, Cold War tensions reached their peak. The construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961 became a stark symbol of division, and the 1960 Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the very brink of nuclear war. Khrushchev's erratic policies and foreign policy gambles eventually led to his downfall, and he was ousted by his colleagues in 1964. He was replaced by Leonid Brezhnev, whose 18-year rule is often referred to as the era of stagnation. On the surface, life for the average Soviet citizen achieved a degree of stability and modest prosperity. The state guaranteed employment, free education, and health care. However, beneath this veneer of calm, the Soviet system was decaying. The centrally planned economy grew increasingly inefficient and corrupt. Technological innovation lagged behind the West, and the country became heavily reliant on oil exports. The arms race continued to drain the treasury. Dissidents who spoke out against the regime were suppressed. The Brezhnev Doctrine asserted the right of the Soviet Union to intervene in other socialist countries, a policy put into brutal practice during the 1968 Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia. The era culminated in the disastrous 1979 invasion of Afghanistan, a costly, decade-long war that became the Soviet Union's Vietnam. After Brezhnev's death in 1982 and the brief rule of two more aging leaders, a new, younger face appeared in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev. Gorbachev recognized that the Soviet Union was in deep crisis and that drastic reform was needed to save it. He introduced key policies, glasnost, meaning openness, which allowed for greater freedom of speech and press, and perestroika, meaning restructuring, which aimed to reform the stagnant economy. For the first time in decades, people could openly criticize the government. The truths of Soviet history, from the famines to the gulags, were finally being discussed. Gorbachev also sought to end the Cold War, withdrawing troops from Afghanistan and pursuing arms control treaties with the United States. His reforms were celebrated in the West, but at home, they unleashed forces he couldn't control. Glasnost allowed long-suppressed nationalist sentiments in the various Soviet republics to surge to the surface. Perestroika failed to fix the economy. Instead, it disrupted the old system without effectively creating a new one, leading to massive shortages and economic chaos. In 1989, the people of Eastern Europe, inspired by Gorbachev's reforms and his refusal to use force, overthrew their communist governments one by one. Culminating in the symbolic fall of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Empire was crumbling. In August 1991, hardline communists attempted a coup to oust Gorbachev and reverse his reforms. The coup failed, thanks in large part to the resistance led by Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Republic. But the event fatally weakened Gorbachev's authority and destroyed the last vestiges of the central government's power. One by one, the Soviet republics declared their independence. On Christmas Day, December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned as president of the Soviet Union. That evening, the red hammer and sickle flag was lowered from the Kremlin for the last time. After 69 years, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics had ceased to exist. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War and redrew the map of the world, leaving behind a complex legacy of industrial might, scientific triumph, artistic genius, and unimaginable human suffering. It was an empire born from a revolutionary dream that ended not with a bang, but with a whimper, a story that continues to shape our world today. Thanks for watching, and if you found this history fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world.